Well, thanks so much, Ron, for that welcome, and thank you, Susan, for helping organize this whole, even more loud, like that, and low, and okay. Yeah, I want to thank Ron and then Susan too for helping organize this and collecting these $5 donations at her table. Glad you could all come. Hope you enjoyed the food, but you may hear an awful lot more about the kind of food you might be getting this lunchtime. Now, when we're rushing to get food on the table, like snatching lunch between meetings, as many of us are doing, it's easy to forget how much it matters what we put in our mouths. It's easy to forget where it comes from, how fresh it is, who grew it, whether it's really good for us, and so on. We've become, as it said, a fast food nation, and for some good reasons. That is, we're busy. At the same time, we know that what and how we eat has a real impact on our health. Food allergies, diabetes, heart disease, even cancer are often linked to what are called Western-style diets. Combating climate change means rethinking where we get our food from, whether it makes environmental sense to fly in apples from New Zealand. And these sorts of considerations have galvanized what's called the locavore movement. How food is produced is also important. People are increasingly aware of the suffering involved in most meat production, the slave wages of many agricultural workers, the pollution and toxic chemicals involved in much industrial agriculture, and they're worried about genetically modified food. These issues do not all have simple answers, but what is clear is that food should give us food for thought and for thinking out of the box, even the lunchbox. Many think we need to think again about what and how we eat and where our food comes from. And as we've been saying repeatedly this fall, we are at a point in history at which we need to quote AT&T, which I wouldn't like normally to quote, to reimagine possible, the great slogan that they've got there. Today's panel is the last course in our banquet this fall. I'm going to let Beth Conklin introduce today's topic and panel in more detail. You may recall she was one of our first speakers about 10 years ago, talking about cannibalism, which is, I guess, a kind of food topic. She's the chair of Vanderbilt's anthropology department, where she specializes in Amazonian anthropology, and she takes an anthropologist's interest in many of our contemporary cultural practices, including food. Beth.
So thank you to David and to the Nashville Library staff and to the Friends of the Library for this wonderful invitation and opportunity to open a conversation with you today. Thank you also to all of you for coming out. Probably more than any other topic we could talk about, food is something that all of us have insights into, ideas about, and there are many people in the audience here who are involved in really interesting food initiatives here in our communities. So I hope we have an opportunity to talk about some of these. When David told me that one of the themes running through the series of library talks this fall was the idea of the future and imagining a future that we would like to live, I thought immediately of food as one key to imagining how Nashville might grow and change, how we might move toward becoming a healthier community. And food, as David said, is obviously a key to a healthier community in terms of physical health and nutrition, problems like diabetes and heart disease, but it also connects to healthy communities in relation to our local economy and jobs and livelihoods. And food, what we eat, how we share it, how we celebrate around it, is key in all kinds of quality of life relations with friends and family and neighbors. from an anthropological point of view, it's this multivalency, the fact that food has so many different dimensions, so many different meanings and roles in our lives, that makes it such an incredibly powerful focus for thinking about society and for changing society. Who we are, who we would like to be, a lot of this is something that we can reimagine around reimagining aspects of our food system and our relations around food. So when we talk about food on a sort of everyday basis, I think a lot of times we're talking about consumption. We're talking about food from the perspective of eating, food from the perspective of shopping for it, preparing it. Eating is something that we do every day, multiple times a day, and it's, you know, such a huge source of recurring pleasure or sometimes recurring anxiety. And one of the things that we've seen in our community that's really heartening and exciting is just an explosion of new options for eating and new food shopping options. So there's lots of new restaurants, the food trucks, all the different farmers markets. There's huge creativity and innovation on the consumption side of food. And there's lots of interesting projects, and people here may want to talk about some of these today, that are trying to improve the food that we eat and the food in particular that our children eat. So farm-to-table projects, farm-to-cafeteria projects, new initiatives to get healthier vending machines in the public schools, to improve school lunches. The farmers market has a new commercial kitchen where entrepreneurs can go to work out their recipes, to offer food classes, and so on. So there's lots and lots going on the consumption side of food. But increasingly, people in Nashville and elsewhere across the country are thinking about food production, about reimagining how we grow, what we eat, and reimagining relations between farmers and the people who eat the food the farmers produce. And so this production side of things is what we're focusing on today. There's a huge amount happening around this. I was privileged this last weekend to attend the second annual local food summit here in Nashville. There were, I don't know, maybe 120 people there, and just incredible range of initiatives and projects and new farms and new businesses around this. CSAs, community-supported agriculture, has been really big in the last few years. I know probably many of you are members of CSAs, where a group of people get together and contribute money, buy a share at the beginning of the growing season to finance a farm operation for the year and then share in whatever the produce is from that farm. So there's lots of these kinds of initiatives happening, and a lot of focus on better use of the incredibly fertile land that we have here in Nashville. Nashville's unusual, I think, among cities our size in having a great deal of really prime agricultural land very nearby. Unlike Atlanta, we haven't paved over everything already. And it's especially remarkable for a city our size to have a place like Bell's Bend, just west across the Cumberland River, within the county limits, a very rural area with a lot of really great farmland. And our city planners are taking this into consideration. The mayor's open space plan envisions Nashville with a large increase in the number of farms, making more agricultural use of open land and so on. But even closer in very, very urban neighborhoods that we don't think of usually as farmable, there's tremendous potential to produce a great deal of food locally with advantages to health, to equity, and reduction in transportation costs, and so on. Some of this seems really radical unless you think back just, a few decades. I think many people here may remember the Victory Gardens of World War II, which was a moment when society decided that we needed to increase local food production, and people responded enthusiastically and energetically. When we want to change, when we need to change, we can and we do. So there's a tremendous amount of creativity that I'm very excited about. And so for today in organizing this panel, I invited two panelists, and the first was to have been Dodd Galbraith, who some of you may know. He's the director of the Institute for Sustainable Practice at Lipscomb University. And unfortunately, last night he was stricken with laryngitis, and so he decided that public speaking just wasn't possible today. He did, however, send the slides for the presentation that he would have done, and having talked to him about this, I wanted to just ask you to bear with me while I channel Dodd for just a couple of moments here. Okay, so this is the title that Dodd would have used. And as the director of sustainable practice at Lipscomb, he's thinking a lot about sustainability. And he shocked me when he told me that he thought that sustainability is not the answer. He said, we're setting the bar too low. If we're talking about sustainability, and what we mean is to just be able to make it so we can continue doing what we've been doing, that's not acceptable anymore. He said, what we really need is to transform the system. So, I'll just move through these since Dodd, I think, can say this visually better than me. When he speaks of interdependence as being something that has been emphasized from God to Stephen Covey, when I first met Dodd, he had just completed a year during which he said that every night before going to bed, he had taken the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and as someone who in his professional career had been a water management specialist for the state, he had gone through the Bible and underlined every passage that had to do with water. He'd done this for an entire year, which made me think that Dodd's wife must be a very special and tolerant person. But he had concluded that the Bible was essentially the ancient Hebrew earth management, and especially water management manual. And from that, he took his personal mission and faith-based orientation to sustainability. Stephen Covey, of course, is the author of the bestsellers, 7 Principles of Highly Effective People, of which recognizing interdependence in our relations with others and our relations with the world around us is one of the major principles. So Dodd wanted to emphasize how incredibly central food is, and in particular the question of how food is produced and the inputs that go into it. And he emphasized that for those of us on an individual basis, these are 3 key points at which we can really make a difference with the choices that we make. So that is channeling Dodd. I know. Anyway, what I'd like to do now, though, is, let's see. Now I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Jason Adkins. Jason is the Environmental Projects Coordinator at Trevecca Nazarene University and associated with their Center for Social Justice. In particular, he's taken a leading role in developing a number of different initiatives around urban agriculture, which I think he'll tell us about today. He is vice president of the Tennessee Association, or the Tennessee Organic Growers Association. And in the past, he's also been involved in a number of initiatives in which he was working at the intersection between sustainability, especially around food production, and issues of social justice and care for vulnerable members of our communities. After he completed studies at the University of Newcastle in England, Jason began a program called the Green Farm, which was an organic farm for men who were recovering from addiction. After that, he managed a small educational farm called Sun Farm for at-risk boys. And since 2009, he's lived in Chestnut Hill, just south of downtown here, where he works with a cooperative intentional community and neighbors in the neighborhood to develop a number of community gardens and other projects. So, Jason, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. It's so good to see you today. There were times when one might not expect so large a crowd. Okay, this will be challenging. Get real intimate with this mic. Okay, so if you walk upstairs to the top of the library, as you look on the walls, you'll see these amazing paintings of Nashville as it was. And so just imagine with those, perhaps after you leave, as you walk along, look at those photographs and imagine what this place would have looked like to James Robertson and maybe some of his close followers and those who followed after him. As he stumbled across this place almost, what is it, 130 years ago? What did I say? I'm at 200, yeah, we're not that young. In the 1780s or thereabout. Okay, thank you, historians. And think about that this settlement was not so much unlike every city in the world, perhaps except Las Vegas or maybe Dubai. People stopped there because it was an excellent place to grow food. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is why urban agriculture. We have lots of land, and it is in need of good care outside of our cities. So why go through the hardships of growing it right here, where there are some challenges that will immediately pop to your mind? You know, this amazing land that we found, that Caucasians found a couple hundred years ago, was a place of plenty. It was some of the richest soil in our state. And as such, it's particularly ironic and sad that this is the very soil that all over our nation we're paving over to the tune of about 20 acres a minute. And we're losing the very best soils in the world to certain kinds of development. And so one reason, that's the bad news, but the good news is that soil which is unpaved, or which we can get pavement off of, perhaps, is the best. It's wonderful. It's the soil that people stopped for. Another reason I want to point out that we should be thinking about farming around and in Nashville, in the urban and peri-urban areas, is just that the need is here. As Beth mentioned, I was working with boys on a farm, on an educational farm just outside the city in Davidson County, and we were trying to teach them what to eat. But those boys would go back to neighborhoods like the neighborhood where I live in now, and their options would be very poor. Getting a gun would be easier than getting a tomato in some of these neighborhoods. And you can get 40 different types of malt liquor in the corner store down the street from me, but you can't find any fresh vegetables. And so the irony that we find ourselves in is that in these cities, which were once great agricultural areas, they're now food deserts. They're now places where good food cannot be come by. And the food that people are buying is expensive, and it makes them sick. Ironically, the people who need fresh food most, closest to them, those about 40% of our neighbors in Chestnut Hill don't have access to cars, so they have to walk to whatever food they get to, or take a 2-hour bus ride there and back. The dollars that could be spent in that neighborhood at a local food market, fresh food market, they're exported out to neighborhoods that perhaps need them less than my neighborhood. So thinking about food access and jobs in the places where people are. You probably know about some of the food crisis. This is mostly going to be a positive, like what are the possibilities of urban agriculture? But I was shocked and continue to be shocked that 1 out of 3 children born in 2000 are expected by the Center for Disease Control to get type 2 diabetes. It's their biggest epidemic that they're dealing with, and they are trying to deal with it. And of course, this is a diet-related diet-related diabetes that we're talking about, and 75% of all of our health costs are related to what we eat. And so when we're thinking through the healthcare crisis that we're experiencing, we need to think, as Michael Pollan has encouraged us to think, it's not a healthcare crisis, it's a food crisis. You may have heard Hippocrates saying that let your food be your medicine and let your medicine be your food. It's ironic that America, well, really fitting, that we spend less money than any country ever on food. In terms of the percentage of our income, we spend about 12 or 13% of our income on food. On the other hand, we spend the most money of any nation ever on health care. Now, those two facts need to be put together. We've gone cheap on food, but as a result, our health has suffered, and we have to pay dearly for the health care to bring us out of the pit that we've gotten ourselves into by eating poorly. We're not really encouraged to think like this in America. In fact, we're not really encouraged to eat like this. I've got a little graph you may have seen, but I always find it really funny, perversely funny. Let me see if I can pull it up for you. And the question that this graph was put to answer was, why does a salad cost more than a Big Mac? Now, if you go into McDonald's, I'm told, you can buy a Big Mac for around $1 or something, and then the salad costs about $4 or something. And so why is that? Why are vegetables so expensive and beef so cheap? It actually takes about 200 to 300 times more energy to produce a measure of beef in comparison with vegetables. So why is it so much cheaper? Well, if you look on the right, let's look on the right first. These are the federal nutrition recommendations. This is what the government encourages us to eat, right? So a bunch of grains, some vegetables, a little much less protein, and very little sugar, oil, and salt. Now, this is not wonderful, but it is at least what we've been given as a recommendation. But if you look on the left, the $30 billion in subsidies that we pay to agricultural sector, this is where those dollars actually go. Okay, 73% to meat and dairy, 13% to grain, and look at poor little vegetables and fruit on the top, 0.37%. And if you look, so compare those side to side of what you're supposed to be eating. You can't even see the fruit and vegetables. And there's a big, huge chunk of it that we're supposed to be eating, 9 servings. So that explains pretty neatly, simplistically, I think, why it does cost more to eat a salad, eat well, we could say, than to eat poorly. Because that's what we're paying for. And we typically think of cheap food as a good thing, right? We seek it out. But the price that we're paying at the register is only a fraction of what we're actually paying. If we're paying $25, $30 billion in subsidies, that leaves about $1,800 per family in the United States that we're actually paying. The cost is very hidden, and that's just through subsidies. That's not counting, that's including the oil subsidies that we give to farms and to the oil companies, but it's also not including a lot of the hidden cost in terms of the pollution that's coming out of these farms that has not been remediated, and a lot of the other factors that we don't account for. So in fact, when we look at the real cost of our food system, it's enormous, and it's much bigger than what we actually see at the cash register. So yes, we've talked a lot about food miles, and you probably heard statistics that 1,400 miles for the average piece of food from where it's grown to where our plate is. That's a long distance, and what that amounts to between all the chemicals that it takes to grow, transport, and refrigerate the vegetables that we eat, we're looking at about 10 calories of fossil fuels invested in every single calorie of food in the United States. That means, as Pollan puts it, that our food system is floating on a sinking sea of petroleum. As petroleum goes up, food moves up, exponentially. So we've seen a 12% rise in about the last 4 years in food, and so we need to rethink food. We can grow food perfectly well right now. One of the men I worked with at the first farm that I worked on, he was a trucker that had fallen into tough times, and he ended up working in the recovery program that I was in, and I began to tell this story about food, and he said, "Oh, I know this story perfectly. I used to take a tractor trailer load of chickens from North Florida, and I'd drop them off in Miami, and in Miami I'd pick up another tractor load of chickens, and I'd drive them from Miami all the way back up to North Florida." And so, we could, we import and export Danish cookies, so why not just trade recipes? So it's kind of insane, and we can grow most of the things that we import, but we just don't, if we learn to eat seasonally, if we learn to enjoy that, which is a great pleasure, and Wendell Berry talks a lot about the pleasure of making the right choice, and this is one of those ways in which that's true, then we can begin to enjoy that and eat more sanely, eat from our local food shed and proper and seasonally. I'm really impressed by what's going on around the world. When we think about urban food production, we have to think about Cuba, which has done more than any city in any country in the world for urban farming. If we look at Havana, and I just wanted you to see a couple minutes of this snippet. How am I doing on time? I'm okay. Okay. Well, I just thought this was really, really illustrative of what can be done inside a city. This is a series called Around the World in 80 Gardens, which is...
Hola, buenos días. This might seem an unlikely place for a garden, but actually it's both incredibly interesting and also very typical of what's going on here in Cuba. After the Russians withdrew their economic support at the end of the 80s and the collapse of the Soviet Empire, Cuba was found in a situation where they had no food. They absolutely had to start growing food without oil, without fertilizers, pesticides, and so all across the city, with a communal effort, they turned bits of wasteland into highly productive areas for food and medicine. They had no medicines. And so what you have now is not just a population growing its own food in the middle of a city, but actually one of the most sophisticated, sustainable means of organic growing, of gardening, medicine, on every level in the world. Right in the middle of the crumbling colonial grandeur, a genuine green revolution is taking place in the form of small productive gardens called huertas. These are the equivalent of our allotments, but built on derelict land, and they are the basis of a new gardening culture that is sprouting up all over the city. Alberto's huerta is typical of many in Havana. The building that stood here collapsed, so Alberto and his brother-in-law cleared the site and brought in the soil in wheelbarrows to build the raised beds, even though they didn't own the land.
We took the huerta because we came from a family of farmers. So, when we saw the empty space here, we agreed to grow plants. It was for a hobby and to give produce back to the community.
When the special period began, did that change the way that you gardened?
Well, I had to start more or less inventing, because the climate here changed a lot. And because of the need, we have to grow quick-growing plants so the community could benefit.
After leaving Alberto, I realized that much of his passion for gardening is driven by his desire to work with and for his local community. His huerta is open and part of the street, which is very different from the private sanctuaries we like to create in our own gardens. The urgent challenge of feeding its 11 million people during the special period meant that the Cuban regime needed to do something on a much larger scale than Alberto's huerta. So kitchen gardens, or organiponicos, were set up in the heart of urban communities. One of the largest of these these is in the suburb of Alama, on the outskirts of the city. To me, this is a sort of vision of heaven. Wonderful vegetables, grown organically. It looks beautiful. People all working together from the community, growing them, earning a living, eating them, caring about it. That's the key. If you want to do something well, you've really got to mean it, and this place means it.
Yeah, so it speaks for itself. What a beautiful vision of what can happen in a community. And really, since this was made, they've gotten cheap oil from Brazil, and their food productions fell within the city. So I guess the formula for urban agriculture is just subtract oil. It was said at their height they were producing about 70% of their city's needs. In a city of, what did they say, 7 million, 8 million? It's big. And it created about 300,000 jobs. So when we think of paying more for food, we should think about the jobs that creates, when you're investing in that, you're investing in people. Well, this was done there, okay, but can it be done in the United States? And I think some of you may know about these, but I'm really animated by the amazing projects that are going on in the United States, one of which is Growing Power in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They're probably at the forefront of the urban farming movement. And they consider themselves community activists with food as the centerpiece. So not many people I know that are doing urban farming are simply there to grow food. It also has a huge social aspect that they're very aware of and very passionate about. And that's definitely true of Growing Power, who's there to bring communities together, create jobs, dismantle racism, and grow a lot of good food for communities that don't have enough of it. And they do all this sort of around growing as a centerpiece. Right when I visited them in 2009, they had 36 people hired within this small 2-acre lot and some off-site land. Their budget was $2 million. I went back for an extended time this year, early in this year. Now they have a $5.5 million budget. They hire 200 people in the city of Milwaukee. So I'm really impressed with the ways in which, again, this is the best in terms of numbers and in terms of sophistication, but think about the potential of these jobs and the amount of food that they're bringing out of these tiny spaces. It's incredible. And it all really begins with compost. That should be said. He's a mad composter, and that's what fuels everything he does. I visited Chicago as well, and there's a place there called City Farm. And City Farm has several different sites, but what they do is they pile wood chips that are cut around the city, and it's a waste problem. And they pile it up about 2 or 3 feet, and then they put compost in rows across on top of this layer of wood chips. And they just grow food right out of that compost. And they use lots that aren't being used. The one I visited was about 1 acre. It was a full city block. It had been raised at some point. And if you do this, you don't really have to worry about what's in the soil because you're getting away from the existing pollutants and way up on your own compost. So you know exactly what you're growing in, which is a challenge in urban agriculture. They employed 3 people on this one big city block. And what the director told me was, in Chicago, there are 80,000 empty lots within the greater Chicago area. They comprise 10,000 acres. So can you imagine like the job potential and the food producing potential of such a place with that much land? And Nashville is not so different. We have a lot of empty land, especially in the area circling the downtown corridor, especially in my neighborhood. 1 out of every 3 neighborhoods and parcels in my neighborhood are abandoned or just empty. And so there's tons of space. We just don't have enough hands to farm it all. We could grow a lot more than we do. So there's always these pockets. And it'd be interesting to try to figure out how many people you could employ and feed from just yards. I'm convinced that America could feed itself from its lawns. So yeah, things that are happening in Nashville, a lot of exciting things. When I made a list, and I think we have a list maybe to hand out, but I thought of Nashville Urban Harvest, who was really the first urban farm here in town, and David over there was part of that leadership and continues to work out in North Nashville in the Whites Creek area. Good Food for Good People, Sean Seipel is doing a lot to organize and teach and sell around good food. Think of Carver Park with Sesway Herring, and those Nashville Urban Harvest and Carver Park bring up a really important part of urban agriculture, and that is land tenure. Both of them suffered from the difficulty in getting a place where they had permanent land tenure, and that's really important, at least extended land tenure. In order to invest as much as you have to invest in an urban space to grow, you need to know you're going to be there for a while, and that's a challenge. So there's lots of school gardens. There's a school garden network that has formed over the last couple years of teachers just interested in teaching through gardening a lot of their curricular requirements. We have got community gardens springing up everywhere, and think of Bell's Bend in the peri-urban area that was already mentioned. Nashville Grown, which has become a food hub where small growers can put their food together in a collective and they will sell it for the growers, and that's a really important marketing piece. Edge Hill, Chestnut Hill Community Gardens, John Henry Hale City Farm in the City. There's Nashville Foodscapes, Jeremy Leckish, who's creating food forests, and then there's our farmers markets right here, and then others that have sprung up around town that are many more growers are visiting and feast together. Tennessee Organic Growers Association. These are some of the associations and people that are working to see food crop up right at our doorstep. So it's exciting. Not only can it happen, it is beginning to happen, and I think we're behind a lot of cities, but we're ahead of where we were just 5 years ago. I just see a ton of interest growing up in all the aspects of urban agriculture. So is that a good place to wrap it up, or should I show some pictures of what's going on around town? How are we doing? I can.
Yeah, some pictures.
Some pictures. Okay. So I'm sorry these are kind of heavy on what I'm doing, but that just seems to be what I have pictures of. This is a. Let's see. Start slideshow. Yeah, this is a plot that was just not being used, and the owner said, "Hey, I'm just mowing it. Why don't you use it?" So we said yes, and Hands On Nashville has just started a farming cooperative, and they're doing amazing things, and they were the leaders of this, and now Trevecca University has taken over. There's a really cute little girl, happens to be my daughter, with a lot of food that we grew. This is this is going a little too fast for me. This is the chicken coop, that we built on Trevecca's campus. We're kind of agriculturally exempt because we're 60-some acres, and so anything over 20 has some exemptions around agriculture. So we're good neighbors, but we can kind of do more than the average folks. So we have 80 hens here that we get about 3 dozen eggs from every day right now. And this is our coop that we built. There we go. That's our greenhouse. It's a really old greenhouse that was totally in disuse that we've begun to garden around. It's already got quite a bit bigger in what we're doing. Inside the greenhouse, we're doing aquaponics, so we're growing fish together with plants inside a circulating system. Please come by if you'd like to see it. It's an interesting way to grow a lot of food on a very small footprint. And this is Growing Power up north. These are in chronological order because Windows 7 doesn't let us rearrange photos. So this is, okay, hop up north to Zone 3. Okay, we're back to Trevecca. Let me come back just a moment. These nasturtiums spilling off this aquaponics system, and you see pots on the ground everywhere. Growing Power utilizes every square foot of vertical space and horizontal space, and just they have hundreds and probably thousands of these pots. Yeah, I'm certain thousands of these pots, just growing vegetables, growing a lot of salad greens. Take a break, come back to Trevecca University. We installed some bees on the roof of the science building. It wasn't a great idea, but I'll tell you that story later. But we do have 3 hives, 2 of which are doing great. So bees in the city, there's a lot of forage around our campus, more than you expect. And ironically, in a lot of farms, it's kind of a bee desert. You get bloom maybe a couple weeks while the corn's growing or soybeans are growing, and then nothing. So There's a lot more diversity in the city, even though you have to worry about a lot of other things. This is a permaculture design course that we had this summer, which teaches people how to design permanent agriculture. Yeah, that's a long story, but that was a really fun project and that happened here. This is a garden that we installed in a day. These things are so, if you go up and check out the book Lasagna Gardening or Lee Reich's book, Weedless Gardening, he tells you, she and he tell you how to just build a garden and plant it right that day if you have the right materials. And it's very quick and easy, using mostly things that people throw away. And that's how we like to garden, because we want to garden in ways that anybody could garden. So this is some of the children that were in our farm camp this summer, cleaning out a community garden bed, and holding up some squash. There we go. Some of the produce that we pulled out of there. There's one of our fish. He's handsome looking, tasty. There's the figs we grew this summer, which I'm really excited about. There's some children from Napier Elementary visiting our chicken coop, and then some carrots and more produce. So yeah, we're seeing a really high yield out of Perk and the other gardens that we're doing there, and this is our first egg run on a bike, so we're hoping to convert like all our, these went to Slowco where we supply eggs, and we're trying to convert all our operations to like, a bike, basically bike and walk and hand tools. Right now we don't use any tractors, any kind of mechanical cultivation. We do everything by hand. And the only thing we have is a truck, which we do use. But I'd like to get away from that and like just become a carbon negative farm. And that's something we can do because we're within 5 miles of the best restaurants in the state, and with a huge amount of urban waste that we can compost and create a tremendous amount of fertility. There's some dent corn we grew and then ground into cornmeal on our little bike, and then there's the cornmeal. We have a bike that grinds wheat. It's pretty cool. So yeah, that's it. Some children planting at Napier, some cherry and fig trees. So those are just a few pictures of what I'm kind of involved in, but there's so much around town that gives us great cause for hope. I hope we can join a conversation about what those hopes are. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason. We're going to open the discussion now to the floor, and I've been asked to ask speakers, when they respond to your question, to repeat it for the audio recording so that we all have a clear version of your question. And you can address your questions to Jason or to Beth. Yes, sir. Just repeat the question.
The question was, do climate change issues change the dynamic of what's being grown in terms of crop failures, and what can we do about that? I've started to plant pomegranates. So, if life gives you lemon climate, then plant lemons. We're going to have to plant some different things. I don't doubt at all what you're talking about. I actually think it is happening, and we're seeing warmer and warmer weather here. I mean, it's, 70 today? And it's not simply that it's occasionally warm in the winter, but, I don't doubt that what you're saying is true. And yes, I've seen all sorts of articles about crop failures. And what we're dealing with is not simply warmer weather, but much less predictable weather. Rain patterns are changing, and it's global. I mean, you can't just retire to a farm and just hope to ignore this, because deforestation in Brazil is causing changing in wind and weather patterns over in Africa. So it's global. What we're doing is of global impact. And how are we going to adapt? We're going to have to build much more resilient systems. Corn and soybeans are not going to cut it. We're going to have to start thinking about deep-rooted perennial systems that can take shocks. And that's a long conversation, but really we need to be much more diversified, and we need to be thinking ahead of this. I really am serious about planting things that are going to do well in zone 5 rather than zone 6, and that's one way that we're doing it. We can actually reverse the heat island effect by planting in it. We can become a heat oasis, and that's been done in Tucson. They simply cut the curbs, and started planting trees along the roads, and they lowered temperatures within the city. So especially in extreme climates like that, you can turn things around with low-tech ways, but it's not going to be a Monsanto high-tech solution, I promise. And that's what you'll hear, is that because climate change is such a problem, you need us to create these super genetically modified seeds that are going to perform well in unpredictable weather. And we are supposed to believe that the people who contributed to the problem of world hunger, in the end, are actually going to solve the problem, and I don't believe it. I think we're going to have to become much more creative, and the solutions are much more democratic than some kind of industrial techno fix.
Yes, sir.
The question was, how are local growers, maybe urban growers, competing with prices at the farmer's market? And it really depends on the customer and how educated they are about food. Some people come to a farmer's market looking for the very cheapest food they can possibly buy. And we have some heated conversations sometimes about why are you so proud of your tomatoes? And we really are proud of our tomatoes because they're a different product and they cost more to grow. And so they require more money, they require more labor. We've substituted human jobs for the very large machines and often illegal labor that makes food so cheap, cash cheap. So I think it's all about education, and we get a lot of people coming there knowing exactly why they should be paying $3 and $4 for an organic tomato. And some people that have to be educated right there while we're standing. Without that education, there's no competition. If all people care about is price, they're going to go buy the cheapest thing, and it's going to perform cheaply in their bodies, and they'll pay the price. I mean, our gamble is we're doing this because we believe it's better food, more nutrient dense, and it's free of the chemicals that have caused a lot of our health troubles. And so if people know that they're willing to pay more. But there's a lot of confusion. I think we've got a long way to go in educating people about why to grow food. And there's an encouraging number of people who already know. And that's our only advantage, is knowledge, I think.
Yes, the lady back there. Yeah, this is a long-term research project being run by Wesley
Jackson, West Jackson.
West Jackson, yeah. And yes, his idea is that you can grow or develop by selection incredibly deep-rooted wheat and grains, which will resist all kinds of atmospheric changes, and also will be perennial. Come back again and again, don't need to be replanted, and so it also makes you independent of Monsanto and other big companies. But I've been told this is like a multi-decade project that will take a long time to come to fruition. I've been out and with these people and seen the land there, and this guy's got a pretty long-term vision. I don't know if you got something you want to add to that.
Thank you for bringing up that question. It was a question about being aware of West Jackson and the Land Institute in Salinas, Kansas. Is that where it is? Yeah, I think so. Salinas, sorry. That is exactly the kind of work that needs to be done. And what he calls it's a mouthful, is a perennial polyculture. Many different things growing in the same place and coming back year after year without the need to run a plow through the land. It's brilliant. And we discovered the first grains that we cultivate now, they were growing wild. And so this is how things grow best. It's how they grow in nature, is they complement each other. And we've been monocropping. And as a result, we've lost 50% of our topsoil in the last century. And of course, that's unsustainable. We can't keep doing that. That means we're going to have to cover our soil better as we grow our food. And this is the answer. I think systems like this are answers to what we're facing.
Yes, the gentleman over here.
The question was, what is aquaponics and its pros and cons? We didn't develop this, we just copied this from Growing Power, and they copied it from other people. Basically, you have a tank of fish, and you circulate their water through pots of plants, where the roots can reach down into the rocks where this water is circulating, and they can draw up the nutrients. The bacteria on the rocks and the roots filter out the ammonia and turn it into usable nitrogen, which helps grow the plants. And so the fish feed the plants, and the plants filter for the fish. And so you have a sort of closed loop cycle there. And the pros are you can grow about 1,600 pounds of edible food on a 4x8 footprint. The cons are it requires to run the pump constantly. So you have to have reliable electricity, and you have to be willing to run it all the time. And this is intensive. We can grow in a 500-gallon tank, we're growing about 200 fish, and that's on the light side of what we're growing tilapia. And that's on the light side of what Growing Power does. So you can grow a lot of edible protein plus all the vegetables above it. We're growing tomatoes, basil, strawberries, mint, oregano, and watercress in our system, mainly. Plants grow 4 times as fast. They require 1/10 of the amount of water as other systems because it's in a greenhouse. And that's another disadvantage. You got to have the structure for it. It's a little expensive to build. I mean, well, really, it's just wood, EPD, and pond liner, and a pump. But our system cost about $1,200 to build. Those are some pros and cons.
Yes, another lady.
There's a
Is
question
that a
in the
lady?
back after that.
And then, yeah. And then
Yes. The question was, can you raise tilapia without antibiotics? I wouldn't know how to raise them with antibiotics. I assume so. I don't know much about how people do it outside of us, except the people I think that are doing it pretty right. So I take it from your question that there's some unsavory things being done with the aquaculture. And I'll tell you, I love my fish because they are such a tight and potent feedback loop. One person came in and saw some, it wasn't me, saw some wasps in the greenhouse. They love the greenhouse. And they sprayed for them. Some of that mist came and hit the water, and I had about 20 dead fish the next day. The great thing about aquaponics is you can't use chemicals, even botanical chemicals. They're very sensitive. And so when you farm in a city, you see that what you pour out comes back to get you. And you realize the stuff we put in the ground, the lead paint, the batteries that we bury, all these things, suddenly they matter because you don't want to, do you really want those in your body? And you realize on a larger scale, that's happening all the time. We are flushing things down Browns Creek. They're going around the corner to the Cumberland Water Station, and they're pumping it back into our house, and they don't test for quite a few of the things that get in that water. So seeing that feedback leap is a pretty dramatic testimony to what those chemicals can do to a sensitive body, and perhaps what they do to our bodies over time.
great, thanks. Is there a question back up there that I missed?
There was one in the corner.
Yes, right in the far corner.
Yeah, so the handout that we have for you lists a number of websites, many organizations with volunteer opportunities, and a number of community gardens and so on. So there are copies of this over there and out in the hall as you leave. I apologize that this is not comprehensive. There's so much going on. And I asked a graduate student to put this together, and she did the best that she could in the time she had, but I know that there are other good projects. But there are some maps and good directions here, and this is an amazing opportunity for anyone of any age and any skill level to get involved in working together with other people in our community.
You can get that map at Community Food Advocates' website. They're a really good resource. And I forgot to mention, it's in there, good. And yeah, on that, they've made a map. So, and I forgot to mention Nashville Greenlands, which is one of our oldest urban gardens, and a very important one. So, was there a question over here?
Yeah, this had to be our last.
Yeah, that's the bad news. That's another con. We feed them catfish feed. But here's what we're going to feed them: soldier fly larvae and duckweed. We can grow that. It's a maggot. They've eaten worse. Some people feed them chicken feces. I'm against that. Corn, yeah. Right.
Well, I'd like to just end with a comment that insofar as a lot of this needs some form of financial input or other, I'm looking at the Homeland Security budget and thinking, this is food security. We should be thinking about this in those sorts of terms, which means that an awful lot of money that we're spending on defending the country against foreign threats could be spent as it was, certainly in England in the Second World War. All these allotments were set up and so on. This would be a wonderful way of redirecting Homeland Security money into food security.
Interestingly, if you want to look into the way that the military is thinking about these issues of food security, look for the National Strategic Narrative. This is an amazing working paper that was commissioned by the Joint Chiefs of Staff that asked people in the military to envision what true security in the 21st century would look like. And a big piece of what they came up with was that whereas the 20th century was about containment of communism and other perceived threats, the 21st century is going to be about sustainment and creating resilience. So there's convergence here. I also want to say, before David wraps up, there are other questions and so many more conversations we'd like to have. Jason, I think it has a few minutes to hang around just after this.
And it's time to thank panelists for a great session. Thank you. Come back next year.